Let's go ahead and dive into a few examples now. Remember, moving averages converging to the upside in a tight bunch right beneath a stock's price isn't something you're going to find in How to Make Money in Stocks. It's just an observation I made after years and years of running screens and setting alerts and looking at leading stocks pretty much endlessly since 1998, making lists, setting alerts, that sort of thing. So the observation was, and this is where it's the most valuable, at least in my opinion, not that it won't work at other times, but when a new uptrend is just getting underway and leading groups of stocks are beginning to establish themselves, you will often notice the stocks at the very head of the bunch will be building the right sides of their bases in a similar fashion, and their moving averages likewise will also act similarly. And so as you're watching a market put in a bottom and start to work its way higher in a new uptrend, you'll also see the leaders doing the same thing. The very strongest leaders might even lead the market to its new uptrend, but in general you'll see the strongest leaders and the strongest groups creating the right sides of their bases and moving up higher with the market. And likewise, that's when you'll see these moving averages start to curl up into a tight, they converge as the stock builds the right side of a new base, ultimately tighten up. And what you want to see at that point is you also want to see constructive price volume action. As you can see right here, we've got price tightening up and you've got considerable dry up in volume. As you can see here, it looks like the lowest volume we can see on this chart, which is anyway, stretches back long enough that makes this significant. In any event, we've got the moving averages converged to the upside in a tight bunch here. Price volume action is super constructive, and lo and behold, the volume finally comes in on the upside. Whether you buy the stock through a pivot point here or possibly you use this as your entry, this clearly preceded the explosive move higher. Let's go ahead and move on to our next example. So the next example we're going to take a look at here is Chegg. Once again, you can see after a steep decline, Chegg bounces, starts working on a potential bottom, and now the right side of this new base or consolidation. And you can see after the stock bounces up and starts to consolidate, and again, ultimately we start to see it tighten up along a couple of its moving averages here on correspondingly light volume down here. Not only is it starting to tighten up along some moving averages, we've now got all the moving averages beginning to converge to the upside. They bunch up right in this area here, and as you can see, we've got an explosive move higher. Now, we don't have a ton of volume coming off of this tight area, and I would just say that's because the stock is working its way into earnings. That's what creates this gap right here. However, after we get the moving averages converging and beginning to expand, and this is all constructive, we had them converge, the stock moves up. The volume is probably on the light side because we've got big institutions already positioned as they wish moving into earnings. However, this is all constructive action as we move into that day. Moving averages begin to expand. You'll see stock breaks out through its pivot. You get some shakeout and retesting, and then you can't tell how big this volume is right here, but that's a solid pocket pivot right before the earnings and all of this constructive action. So you can see here this was another clue, and as we discussed on the example prior, this often happens as the market's putting in a bottom, working on a new uptrend, and you'll also see other stocks in the same group and sectors beginning to shape up in the same manner. So let's go ahead and take a look at another example now. Here we've got COUP, C-O-U-P, high flying software stock. And here you can see we've got all of the moving averages tighten up as the stock begins to calm down and tighten up a little bit along, which is actually its 50-day moving average here, holding, quick shake below its 200. It pushes higher, and once again, as these moving averages begin to expand, the stock drifts into these moving averages in a constructive manner on correspondingly light and declining volume before the big volume really comes in and takes it through resistance and a solid move higher. So you can see again the moving averages tightening up and beginning to expand with the corresponding constructive price and volume action once again leads to an explosive move higher. And you'll see this happens again a little bit further out. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at another example of COUP. So here we are looking at our final example and yet another example of COUP a little further out in time. This one is April 2020. We can see as at the same time, you can see up here, the market was putting in a bottom and working on the beginning of a new uptrend. So was the stock, and it has the same sort of price action as we've seen on the prior three examples, where we tighten up a little bit along some moving averages as the stock tries to form a bottom. And here we go, moving averages converged into a tight bunch right here, right beneath its price as we begin to expand. And sure enough, this is a constructive pullback to what was, we've flipped, you could call this a pivot area or resistance, whether you buy through here or not. You can see it respects this area after we break through it on big volume. We pull back on lighter volume, shake a little bit below the stock's 10-day moving average, which is this green line. That's a very short-term moving average. We get solid support right at that 152 area where you might have taken a shot at it if you wanted to do it early, but even here you haven't really got the clue from the moving averages until this area here. But when we see this and the constructive action along the average as the stock moves sideways and the moving averages begin to expand, you're still in plenty of time to accumulate shares in and around that area as well. As you can see, you still get an explosive move to the upside. So as you can see, paying attention to something like this as a new uptrend is getting underway, and now that it's been pointed out to you and you begin to look for it, it'll begin to pop out everywhere. It's not only a great thing to see the market doing that and the leading stocks doing it alongside it, it also gives you a clue ahead of time which leading groups to focus on, because the strongest groups are going to start doing this first, with and maybe even a little bit ahead of the market. So when you're screening for stocks and making your lists and you start to see, one group or even a sector of stocks start to shape up in a similar fashion and all of those moving averages start to tighten up, it's worth, setting your alerts, keeping an eye on that group. It tells you that there's some money flow moving that way. That's where rotation is headed or potentially headed. So I hope that all makes sense. And as always, thank you very much for listening.